the physiology of these whales, how they echolocate, what the inside of their head looks like even, so that we can understand the miraculous abilities these orcas have to understand the vast range they travel through her excellent mapping. The videography that you'd see online in our series was spectacular and very hard to get. And so art, you know, the old saying, art saves lives. Well, that goes for animal lives too. I mean, I think when people can, through photography, see these animals for themselves, it changes everything.
In that same vein, you've met a lot of people along the way that have helped tell the orca story, scientists, politicians, native tribes. Can you tell us about how you go about selecting people to interview, and tell us about a few of the memorable people and interviews that you've had to tell this story?
Yes, I mean, number one, of course, is expertise, that they know what they're talking about, whatever that thing is, that they are the expert in, whether it is the science or they are someone in their tribe who knows the stories and the culture of this animal, or they are, you know, they're up close and they know their business, whatever that business is. So expertise is number one. And number two, again, is intimacy. It should be, for me, someone who really knows and feels this animal, and really knows its struggles, and really knows its majesty, the eminence of these animals. And so I look for voices who can convey that to readers. And these may be people who have been at the forefront of their scientific discipline for decades. Sometimes it can be someone who's very fresh to this. It can be an advocate whose life has been transformed by the energy they feel for wanting to try to save this animal. And there's that incredible authentic voice of care and concern. Or it could be a tribal elder who can very generously, I feel, because these are matters of great privacy and privilege, share the stories that their families have passed on for generations about these whales. And along that line, I want to share just a little bit that was shared with me by Bill James, the late Bill James, the chief at Lummi, who sat with me on a rainy spring day with a fire in the wood stove in his reading chair, and told me the story of how the Lummi people came to understand that the orca whales are their relatives. And he didn't mean that as a metaphor, he meant it literally. And in the book, I relay this story just as he told it to me. And it is a very special story because it brought to life for me and surprised me in a way that I wasn't really knowing I was going to encounter that day. I didn't know that story. And furthermore, when he talked about the connection that his people feel with what these whales have gone through, that their people have gone through similar trauma of being separated from their families in the boarding school era, of losing their language in that particular setting, as captive whales have been forced to do when they're separated from their families. That really touched my heart. And so you asked me, what do you look for? Who do I find when I'm looking for voices? I look for intimacy, I look for expertise, I look for authenticity, I look for transformational voices on behalf of these animals that take them out of being just a general idea to something very specific, either in their abilities or in their cultural meaning to the tribes and to everyone here in the Northwest. They are a signature of wildness, of what sets us apart in the Northwest.
Last Saturday, you covered the anniversary of the brutal hunt and capture of one of the southern resident orcas. You wrote that 50 years ago, on August 8th, Lolita was a baby orca without a stage name. And that changed forever the day in Penn Cove when she was rounded up and captured for sale to the Miami Aquarium, where she still lives today. Mm-hmm. And today, Lolita, or Tahlequah, as she's known by the Lummi Nation, is the sole survivor of the southern resident orcas captured for the aquarium trade. At the time of the captures, many people interviewed said that having audiences at these aquariums experience and connect to the orcas in this way raised awareness that would contribute to their protection. Can you talk about what you learned from the people you interviewed about this?
Yes. So, I will never forget sitting with Ted Griffin on his couch. And Ted Griffin was the man who brought Namu, the killer whale, to Seattle and put him in his aquarium. And Namu had been accidentally captured in a fisherman's net. Ted Griffin ran a Seattle aquarium. He was a consummate collector, and there was only one thing that he didn't have yet for his collection. That was an orca. And so word was out that there was someone in Seattle who wanted an orca, and he went up there to this area. The fishing town was called Namu, with a backpack full of cash, and brought Namu back to Seattle in a floating pen. And you know what? He was greeted with a key to the city, and he was greeted by cheering crowds, and he was regarded as someone who had done something wonderful in bringing this orca for everyone to see up close and personal. And I think it is so important to hear that story and realize that in Seattle in the 1970s, which is not that long ago, you could be walking down Western Avenue and see an orca whale being lifted over the sidewalk in a sling in preparation for being put in a truck to go to SeaTac to be sent to Miami. To be in a tank for 50 years. So this was the norm at the time. And it took the work of 3 state leaders, all of them still alive today, all of them Republicans, Dan Evans, Ralph Monroe, Slade Gorton, to put a stop to it and outlaw whale hunting in Puget Sound. And that was in 1976. It's not that long ago. And it transformed our understanding of these whales to see them in captivity. They had been reviled, they had been shot at, they were regarded as vermin and pests, much as some people still do wolves today. This is something any predator has suffered in our culture. And it's very interesting to me that by seeing these whales up close and personal, they came to be adored and then eventually protected. And other scientists along the way also contributed to that. Paul Spong, who today runs Orca Lab, and in the book he's introduced at Orca Lab and talks about his journey and coming to understand these whales. He was working with a captive whale named Scanna. And he at first, was off in a building, and she was off in a tank, and he was not even bothering to spend time with her. And he quickly learned that she wouldn't even cooperate with his tasks and experiments unless he spent time with her. And so he began, seeing if he could put his feet in the pool and seeing if he could rub her head. And pretty soon she was giving him little rides. And his whole understanding of the complexity, the intelligence, and the depth of personality of this being changed him. It wasn't long before he left that for good and became adamantly against captivity for orcas. And so this is a process of change. It is a process of learning, and our society has learned enormously about this species just in that short generation of time.
As one story, the conditions that Lolita is kept in at the aquarium are truly heartbreaking. Could you describe them as well as the story that you covered about the whale song? I think you know which one I mean.
Right. So I in the book, I tell this story that there was a reporter that I reached out to as I was learning about the capture era, who he's still with Dateline NBC, and he had gone down to see Lolita at the Seaquarium to do his story about her. This is 20 years ago. And he did something really interesting. He took a recording of L-Pod calls down to play for her. And she has living family in Puget Sound today. Her mother may be an L-Pod whale. There's never been a DNA test to prove that, but she does make L-Pod calls. And you know what he did? He goes and stands next to the rim of her tank, and he just turns on this recording machine just to see what happens, just starts playing the calls. And he told me this story of how she immediately came right over to the side of the pool, stuck her head out of the pool, and just wanted to hear it and hear it and hear it some more. And he said he's never forgotten that her reaction was so intense and so specific. As he said it to me, it was just like anyone else who heard the voice of someone that they hadn't heard in a very long time, and they just wanted to hear it again. And he also said to me that he was shocked at how small her tank was, that he figured you know, there must be some other place where she is when she's not on show. And, but it would be the equivalent for us of being like shut in a bathroom with the door shut the rest of our life. And so it was really interesting to talk to him. There are a lot of people still around, even from the day she was captured, who remember it because it wasn't that long ago.
Can you talk a little bit about the current efforts of the Lummi Nation to bring Tahlequah home from the Miami aquarium after 50 years in captivity?
This picture that you see on your screen right now, those are people from Bellingham turning out at a Unitarian church to bless a totem pole before it goes on its journey all the way from the Lummi Nation to Miami, where members of the Lummi Nation who weren't allowed inside the aquarium stood across the street and put this totem pole there as a symbol and played JK and L-Pod calls at maximum volume over the wall, hoping that maybe she'd hear them. That was a couple of years ago, and they've continued in this fight to bring her home. And there are now 2 members of the Lummi Nation who have also filed a notice of intent to sue. I mean, they're never going to give up. And I should say that this effort has been going on for quite a long time. A former governor, Mike Lowry, tried to get her released. Many conservation groups and individual citizens have poured their energy and time into this. The Orca Network has worked hard on it and continues to. It's not a new cause. I talked to Governor Dan Evans today, who was one of the people who stopped the captures in our state. And you know, he asked about her. He wanted to know how that campaign is going. You know, people haven't forgotten her. And, you know, I always feel a little bit incorrect when I say there are only 72 Southern residents left. There are actually 73, right? Including her, 72 in the wild. Yes,
including her. The book with us, Orca, Shared Water, Shared Home, is going to be published next spring. It's not your first book. As Erica mentioned, you've written 6 others, including this one. One a few years back with Mountaineers Books on the Elwha Dam removal. Just in taking a look at this, writing this book took untold time and research and creativity. It was also an emotional toll on you, I would imagine. Given the huge and more immediate platform that you have as a journalist, why a book?
Oh, you know, it's a total joy and a privilege to write a book. It's a book stands for time, and it's your chance to tell a story in a larger frame. That's the joy of it. And in these orcas, you know, they're worth it. Chinook salmon, they're worth it. It's a story that is as old as this region and as new as every new resident who's so thrilled that they get to live here and can't wait to send home pictures to their family, wherever that family is. You know, it's the thing about writing a book is that you do get to share a story more deeply and at greater depth and of heart as well as content in it. And that's just a very great joy to me. And I think my colleagues at work need to be thanked for that. You know, each time I've done this, I've disappeared for a while to do it, and they've carried the load. The Seattle Times celebrated its 124th birthday this week. That's pretty incredible. Locally owned, family owned, craft-made journalism for this community every day. It's very unique, actually, and I'm very grateful to the newspaper for supporting this book and supporting me in this work. I mean, honestly, for at least 2 years, I was a full-time whale reporter. There can't be too many of those in the United States.
Oh, no, and we're grateful for it as well. And as a journalist, you maintain high standards of objectivity, even with extremely emotional topics like reporting on Tahlequah and her dead calf. You must subscribe to this discipline to be successful at it. But how do you maintain this? How do you define and achieve balance? And why is this important to your work?
Well, look, I mean, this is something I always say when I'm talking about orcas and Chinook. It's the law. They're supposed to survive. We're supposed to be doing everything in our power as a community to ensure their survival. Not only their survival, but that they thrive, that they're actually returned to abundance. And so, you know, in standing up for them, we're standing up for what we as a society have called for and say we embrace. And it's a thrill to me to do that and to to, in every way I can, inform and encourage this effort, because it's a long slog and it's hard and it's expensive. But honestly, we're starting to do some of the very most exciting things. I mean, Washington State, there isn't a place in the country, therefore the world, that has taken out more or bigger dams than Washington. And we are absolutely leading the way in conservation efforts, large and small, from as big as the Elwha Dam, the biggest dam removal ever anywhere in the world, to the mighty Pilchuck Dam, the Nooksack Dam. You know, these things just happened a couple weeks ago. And these are only one type of the sort of restoration that's happening in our state. King County just planted more than 1 million trees, all with volunteer efforts, and they got it done a year ahead of schedule. This is tremendously exciting. There are salmon enhancement groups all over the state. There are native plant societies chapters in every region of the state. There are reforestation efforts going on of every sort. You know, we are in a very exciting place at a very exciting time. And to be able to be a part of that as a journalist and as an author is just a very great joy to me.
We have a lot of questions coming in, which I'm just thrilled about, but there's one important subject that I wanted to cover with you before we take people's questions, and that really relates to a sense of place, which I think is key to your work, key to my work. The southern resident orcas are a key indicator of the health of the lands and waters of the Pacific Northwest. And in an interview that you did with Joe Gatos of the Sea Doc Society, he framed this question, and he asked, what is lost to everyone's sense of well-being if people start to see this as a dying place?
Right.
Can you talk to us a bit more about what you see at stake for this place we call home, with the unthinkable loss of orcas and salmon?
You know, I want to talk about that from a slightly different place, which is a place of intense joy. So here I am, I'm at my desk in the newsroom at the Seattle Times on a kind of, you know, dreary November day. And what happens? I suddenly start hearing from Orca Network that J-Pod's in town. They're here. I mean, the southern residents are right here. They've come all the way into central Puget Sound. They're literally at the foot of skyscrapers. And so what's the next thing that happens? You know, I go out and I see the residents of Seattle. They're on the beaches of West Seattle. They're at the south end of Vashon Island. They're pouring out of their offices. They are as thrilled as they could possibly be. And why wouldn't they be? Here's this top predator, a whale, right there in downtown Seattle. You know, who else has that? Who else has that? And I think that the people of Seattle and of the Northwest feel a great sense of attachment and pride and thrill about the fact that we still share this home and these waters with these animals, which is why I wanted to call the book Orca, Shared Home, Shared Waters. That is still who we are. One of the things we did at the newspaper for the series and that I did in the book was go to California, a place that, believe it or not, is home to the Sacramento River, which used to be second only to the Columbia for salmon. Well, who really thinks about salmon fishing in California anymore? We think about software, we think about great wine. We don't really think about salmon. And you know, people there have kind of forgotten that they're a salmon place. Well, that's not true here. You know, whether it's an old duffer on the Skagit calling me up about a big slab-sided Chinook that he just put in the smoker, or it's Phil James telling me that story of who the orcas are to their people. We've got something so special here that is so unique. It definitely touches my heart every day, and I know the hearts of everyone who lives there.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your stories and your wisdom and what's obviously your deep passion for the orcas, salmon, and for all things Salish Sea. And want to thank our audience. We want to allow a significant time now for our audience to ask questions of Lynda. But before I turn this back over to Erica, the ongoing crisis with the southern resident orcas has prompted calls for intervention and action. our book with Lynda will be a storytelling tool for marine conservation engagement across Puget Sound to educate and inspire and to build grassroots supports for tangible actions to support orca health. As I tell all of our Braided River authors and photographers, the work isn't over when you've turned in your manuscript. The real work begins once the book is published. With your support, we can make a difference. We can make this book a foundation for a multi-year public outreach effort of media efforts with Lynda and partnerships with education and community groups, everyone working together to restore and protect Puget Sound and the greater Salish Sea. Along with our partners, we'll provide the tools and concrete actions that people can take. And as with all our Braided River projects, the book launch will be the foundation for these events, media partnerships, exhibits, classroom appearances, and so much more. As a nonprofit, book sales alone won't cover the expenses of our advocacy and our impact campaign. We have a link in the chat of how you can support this work. And in appreciation for your support, we will include your name printed in the book. We have lots of levels of giving, and we hope that you'll consider helping us to spread the word. I'm optimistic as Lynda is, and I truly believe that together each one of us can make a difference. So with that, I will turn it back over to Erica and have you have your questions answered.
Thank you so much, Lynda and Helen. We have been getting just a ton of questions from everybody. The first one, I have a question from Joshua, who says, since 2018, what policy changes have been made in response to this story, and which have yet to be made? Right. What is accounting for lags in policy making and implementation?
Right. So I think, and first of all, I want to promise that if we run out of time, I'll answer these questions that we don't get to by email. So Erica's going to get them to me and you'll get your answers. Right, Erica?
Yep, absolutely.
So, so what happened? Okay, so not enough. I'll start there. Not enough, because obviously we've lost animals since Tahlequah's journey. But I do want to give some shouts out to what has happened. First of all of you. There have been more people paying more attention to this issue right now than there have been in more than a decade, and that is hugely important. And I really thank you for that, and I ask you to stick with it, because salmon recovery doesn't happen overnight, and orca recovery doesn't happen overnight. So number one, there are more people paying attention than there ever have been. Number two, the legislature stepped up in some very specific ways, some of them actually quite historic. One of them was the following. We enacted legislation that goes even further than California to get a handle on toxics, the toxics that are poisoning the food that these orcas eat. And this is all about source control. This legislation will allow over time new regulation from the Department of Ecology to begin to go after these chemicals before they come into commerce, so that they're not in our homes and they're not in the environment, and therefore can't get into the orcas. That was huge. Environmentalists and conservationists have been trying to get this legislation passed for years, and it was the coverage of Tahlequah and the southern residents that pushed this thing finally over the top in the state legislature. So that was very big. Jay Inslee asked for more than $1 billion for orcas, and he didn't get it all, but that was a very big ask, and he did get a lot, including funding, quite a lot of it, for a panel to take on this whole issue of taking down the lower Snake River dams to keep that community conversation alive. There also was a lot of money put into hatchery production to try to get more food out there in a targeted way for the southern residents. We could talk more about hatchery production. It's one of those things that cuts both ways with salmon, as we all know. On the other hand, hatcheries right now in some rivers are 80–90% of the fish that are there. I talk a lot about this in the book. The other thing the legislature did, something very important, they enacted whole new regulations to prevent oil spills from, we already have regulations about tankers and oil spills, but of course, whole new ways of shipping oil have emerged, and this goes after these barges that are being towed behind tankers carrying lots and lots of oil. And that was a brand new initiative to increase our protections against oil spills. Very important work. And they poured a lot of money into habitat fixes. That removal of the dam on the Nooksack River, that got paid for with money from the state legislature in part, along with donations from ordinary people and also the Allen Foundation. So, you know, these are all necessary changes in fishing regulations. That didn't happen, and there's some people at the department who will tell you that, you know, that changing the fishing regulation doesn't dial it down enough to make a difference for these orcas. But there are scientists out there who will tell you that, you know, every fish has to go in an orca mouth rather than a human mouth. So we haven't seen changes on fishing yet, but on every other front, habitat, oil spills, you know, going after toxics, which is a really big deal, that all happened. And, you know, I think that in a legislature that's dealing with everything from higher education to the Western State Hospital to try to raise orcas up big enough for them to keep taking these steps, that's going to be the work of all of you to keep orcas in the forefront, because remember, there's so many other needs.
Thank you. Chris Connolly has a question. He says, thanks for this great conversation. The chart that was shared about Chinook salmon decline was based on the Salish Sea, but since the southern resident killer whales live in the Salish Sea for less than half the year, can you talk about the link between the Columbia River Chinook and the southern residents?
This is not going to make you happy. If you read the Seattle Times, be sure to be watching in a couple of days. I'm going to be talking tomorrow at 9 o'clock with NOAA scientists about new modeling that shows just terribly bad news for Snake River Chinook, spring, summer Chinook, and sockeye because of climate change. You know, these animals are being pushed absolutely to the edge, and they need all the cold water refugia they can possibly get to, because, you know, the future for them is very disturbing. So, you know, the Columbia is a very important source of fish, as is the snake for these whales. It's not the only one. They also take Chinook out of Chehalis, where, let us remember, there's a new dam proposed. There's no dam on that river today. They also take fish from the Sacramento system, including winter Chinook, which are among the absolutely most endangered in all of the West Coast. You know, the southern residents are in a situation where they're encountering what scientist Brad Hansen at NOAA called, when he spoke with me about it, serial failures. As in, you know, they go one place and there's just not quite enough. They go another place and there's not enough. They go another, there's not enough. The Fraser River, which provides the fish they're eating right now up in the Salmon Islands, is looking like it's going to have a historically low number of fish this year. That's when these whales really get into trouble. You know, they need to be able to eat every day. They're not fasting adapted like us. They're big animals. They travel 80 miles a day. The lactating females need even more nutrition. You know, we cannot expect them to thrive or even survive if they can't get enough to eat. And the picture of salmon recovery in Puget Sound is not nearly where it needs to be. It's basically flat. Since they were listed, all that money, all that effort, all that caring, you know, we're not moving the needle yet. And it's all about habitat destruction. For everything we fix, we lose more with growth and development. And there's a very interesting movement that started at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Their conservation director there, Jeff Davis, talked to me passionately about how the standard that we have on the books of no net loss, it's not good enough. We need to change that to net gain, so that anytime we remake the landscape, we leave it better than we found it, the old scout oath, right? And so this is the kind of profound change that these whales need. You know, if we keep on with business as usual, we know where it's headed. There's just no question.
Diana Lloyd asks about any positive change for the orcas with COVID-19, less noise in the water, anything.
You know, yes and no, Diana. I mean, this is one of these human things that just drives you crazy, right? Okay, so first, nobody's in their boats. This is like March, April. I mean, there's less boating activity then anyway. And then people are staying home and behaving. Okay, so then everyone gets stir crazy and they decide, well, I can't go out to eat dinner. I can't go to a baseball game. Here's what I'll do. I'll get an RV or I'll get a boat. And so suddenly there are all these recreational boaters out there in the San Juans and elsewhere who don't have necessarily a lot of experience, and they're getting too close. They're making too much noise. They're messing around. It's crazy. There was a story in the paper recently about a couple of people, chasing a whale because they want to get a picture on their phone. I mean, too many people, too much mayhem. Needs to stop. It's not okay. These whales need peace. They need quiet. They especially need it right now. Don't forget, we've got these pregnant moms out there and they've got to eat and they need quiet water in order to find their fish. So COVID, at first it was quieter than ever. Nobody even saw a boat out there, but it's totally turned around now. It's super busy. Yeah, everybody got bored. So they went out and got in a boat.
We're getting a lot of questions in about the Snake River dams and some of the news over the last couple weeks.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about those dams and whether they'll ever be breached?
Yeah. So people who follow the Lower Snake River Dam issue closely know very well what I'm about to say, which is that after spending millions of dollars and even more years on this whole question of what to do about operation of the Columbia River hydropower system, to operate it in a way that you don't wipe out the 13 runs of salmon and steelhead that are in that river now listed as either endangered or threatened. After all that review in an EIS, an environmental impact statement that was ordered by a federal judge, by the way, came out to basically the same place of where we were before that started, namely something called flexible spill, under which more water is sent over the dams during the spring freshet to try to imitate something a little bit more like a natural flow regime for these fish, continued work on habitat and so on, but no breaching, no breaching at all was tolerated in that report as a way to do something for these whales. And so that the next thing that's going to happen, and by the way, the biological opinion that's written on the basis of that by NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they're the ones charged with rebuilding these whales to a healthy population. Their biological opinion also did not call for breaching. So basically we're back where we were and where we've been, because really this same question has been coming up in the region over and over again. It was one of the very first salmon stories I wrote at the Spokesman Review in the 1990s of Judge Malcolm Marsh, saying, the system cries for a complete overhaul. Well, that's not happened. And, I think the people closest to this who work on it, the advocates, what they're saying now is that's not where change is going to happen. It needs to be a different kind of conversation at the community level, in which people in Eastern Washington, Western Washington get together and look at the energy future for the region and talk about, what can and should be done for clean energy, for a sustainable future for the Northwest that keeps these salmon and these whales alive. And it also goes to questions about would you replace the benefits of these dams that people rely on? We have to remember, it's not like Elwha, which was truly a deadbeat dam. That thing couldn't meet modern fishery requirements. It couldn't meet modern environmental standards. Klein's Canyon above it, the same. But it was different. That was under a FERC license, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license. And under that process, once your license is up, your license is up. And you need to either fix the dam or get rid of it. That's not the case with these federal dams. They're federally owned. There's no FERC license in play. And so that's why we've seen this continued litigation, because basically that's been the pathway for change. But I think, the people closest to this are now beginning to feel that we need a different process. This process keeps generating the same results, so going to have to take a different path. And I know the governor of Oregon has been calling for that kind of an approach, and we'll just see what happens. This news just came out 2 weeks ago, so I think people in some ways are probably still just recovering.
We've had one or two folks ask about your story yesterday about the sea lions. and they were wondering if you could speak to that a little bit more, and why that may be necessary.
Right. Even some of the people who voted for this on this task force were uneasy about it. These are marine mammals. They're very intelligent. They're protected, for heaven's sakes. And this is a vast expansion of the existing kill program that's been going on now for a couple of years at Bonneville Dam. And it's an expansion in several ways. It brings in a whole new animal, the stellar sea lion, in addition to the California sea lion. And it's the numbers. I mean, we're talking almost 900 of these animals over 5 years. That's a lot. And it's open season. I mean, if you're a sea lion and you're seen within this kill zone, which goes basically between Bonneville Dam and the Dallas Dam, you can be taken. I mean, it used to be that you had to be a known predator of salmon, and you had to have been sort of marked and known to be that. And secondly, they had to try non-lethal first. Not this time. It's if you're a sea lion and you're in that place, you're a target. And so that's new. And it's funny, this has been in some kind of public process now since 2018, but when I heard about this likely being approved like tomorrow, I thought, oh wow, people are going to react, because it doesn't matter how many meetings there have been, if you start talking about, killing almost 900 sea lions, people are going to have something to say. So, and this could start as soon as fall. Now, I told you that some of this is already going on, and that's true. And there have been some results that are regarded as encouraging. At ODFW, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, they took out, gosh, what did I say in the paper? 33 sea lions, and they at the Willamette Falls, and they saw a cratering of how many steelhead were being created, and an improvement in their risk of extinction. In other words, the risk of extinction also went down. So, the fish managers that I spoke with yesterday felt like this might be a short-term solution, but don't be fooled. It's not enough. You don't just go shoot sea lions with tranquilizing darts and crank out hatchery fish. This is a bigger, more systemic, endemic problem than that. That's about a much bigger habitat and a much bigger issue of everything, from how much water is in streams to what temperature is that water, about forests and whether they're intact, about how much development is going on in the Puget Sound region and beyond. It's interesting, when I spoke to one of the members of the task force, he said, I voted yes, but with a caveat that this can't be it. It can't be the only thing. And that's an important message, I think, for everybody.
Well, I think we have time for about 2 more questions. And then, like Lynda said, she's happy to answer the remaining ones after we wrap up this event today. Anne had sent in a question over email earlier today, saying thank you so much for the impactful and educational articles that the Seattle Times has been doing about the Southern residents. And she wanted to know, how has Tahlequah's journey affected you, and what have you learned from the emails you've received from readers all over the country and all over the world?
Yeah. I think this for me was, reporters talk about their lifetime story, the story that will stay with them all their lives, and there's no question she's that for me. And I think the reason she was such a transformational story for me, honestly, was the human response to her. It was hearing from people all over the world, hearing from very high-placed political people who said they couldn't function. They didn't sleep last night. They were too upset. They couldn't do their job. I honestly took great hope from that people, with everything they're dealing with in their own lives, could be so touched by a mother whale. That to me was a very good sign. It shows me that we are still people of heart and mind for the vast intelligence that we're so privileged to live in and among. That is the animals with whom we share this world. So, she, for me, I have a picture of her in the study where I work. She's never far from where I am doing my work for the paper, or far from my thoughts. She to me represents not only what these whales are going through, but what we're going through as a people, with so much to do, that we keep this natural world that we're so privileged to live in close to heart, close to mind, and take good care of it for all of those who come after us, both whales and humans. I take great heart at how people have responded to her story. I think it says a lot about who we are and where we're headed.
That leads right into the last question here, which someone had submitted saying, what are the most effective ways to support orca conservation as an individual living around Puget Sound, just someone who cares?
Thank you for that question. There are so many ways to be involved, whether it's planting trees and ripping out knotweed alongside streams so that they're cool and shaded and there's food for the insects that feed the fish that feed the orcas, or it's getting involved in salmon recovery enhancement groups and pitching in with the habitat work that they do. Honestly, I think being politically involved is incredibly important. Be sure to vote, be sure to pay attention, know what's going on in the state legislature, know what's going on in your local government. The decisions being made in King County today by the flood district, which is the county council sitting as the flood district, about what to do with the Green River, where it should it have even more walls along it and levees, or should those pieces of the river that are still natural be left that way? Should levees that are there be moved back? Should taxpayers be willing to pay for that? These are all local decisions, and they involve every single one of us. So, of course, I'm going to tell you, read the newspaper, subscribe, keep us going. But be involved, read, care, pitch in. That it's not magic. It's the old business. Work at it, stick with it, and bring new people with you.
Well, I want to thank both Helen and Lynda for joining us here tonight, and I want to thank the audience for joining us as well. The link to learn more about Lynda's book and to get your name or the name of a loved one in it is on the screen, and it's at braidedriver.org/orca. We hope you really enjoyed today's event and that you stay in touch with Braided River as we work over the coming months and years to share this powerful story of place, of human collaboration, and our connection to the incredible southern resident orca whales. And with that, I think that concludes our event tonight. So I hope that you have a great rest of your evening, and be well.
Thank you.
Take care.